Good day, buenos dias, everybody. My name is Armando Rendon. I'm editor of Somos, escrito magazine, which is published by Somos escrito Literary Foundation. Welcome to our latest discussion via Zoom. We'll be speaking with a poet, writer, musician. We want to hear more about that musician part. His name is Carlos Fidel Espinoza. He has been, his writings have been in all kinds of different publications, including magazines. And too many to list at this point, but he also works as editor-in-chief of the Barrio Panther Literatura Magazine in El Paso, and advocates for literature and writing on the US/Mexico border. He's taught courses in creative writing, poetry, Chicano literature, and in rhetoric and composition at the University of Texas at El Paso Community College, and Cochise College. Welcome, Carlos.
All right, thank you all for having me.
We're very pleased to have you, Guy.
Thank you.
Being from El Paso and right on the frontera, I must say that your writing, this is your first collection of poetry, and it's won the 2021 Southwest Book Award. Congratulations on that.
Oh, thank you very much.
It's well deserved. I found the writing very gripping, raw maybe in some places, very down to earth, and certainly very much part of the frontera. I think I wanted to start off and Scott Duncan-Fernandez, who is our senior editor, and basically he's also does technical work. He's making sure that we all stay looking beautiful on the Zoom here, at least visible. Jenny Irizary, who's another senior editor, and she also pretty much focuses on poetry. So she's going to have some very salient and very, I think, decisive questions, I'm sure. Carlos, I was going to refer to a particular poem, and I have to try to find it here.
Okay.
And let's see. This is on page 67. If you have a copy of your book.
Yeah, I sure do.
With everything that's been happening in Uvalde recently, and this basically I read this around that time, a couple of weeks ago now, that the tragedy happened in Uvalde. Would you mind reading this, and then let's talk a little bit about it? Tell us more about it. It's called
Sure.
Crossing Rivers.
Crossing Rivers. Oh, you picked one of the hardest poems for me to read, which is awesome. Thank you. Thank you for that. For Oscar Alberto Martinez and his daughter, Valeria Martinez. Give me your hand, little brother. I'll help you cross this river to a land not much farther. We are waiting for you. The pozole is bubbling hot. The radishes are crisp. The limes have a hint of sweetness. Your family will always have a place at this table. Your children will always have shelter here.
Mm. Well, it struck me pretty hard too when I read it, because of the visions of the father and his daughter by the riverside, by the Rio Grande, on their faces, on their bellies, dead. They had tried to cross the river and didn't make it.
Yeah.
You must have that vision in your mind. Maybe you have even more clarity, because you live right on the river, and you're aware of the draw that the United States has for people from south of the border, let's say. What drew you to this? In fact, what made you write this particular set of words, write them down?
I mean, it was I'm a father and I have 2 daughters.
Hmm.
And it was the image of seeing them face down in the river. And I wanted to offer something else, something different, because that's the image that's going to stay with everybody. That's the image that's, it was blasted on the news, it was put in blogs, and that's the image of like, look how cruel the border is. So when I was working on this poem, I wanted to sort of create something more beautiful that they could come to. And so the image isn't them in the river, but them eating pozole with me and my family. Yeah, that's a really hard poem for me to talk about just because it pressures me up, It's kind of like people are constantly saying, well, they need to come here the legal way. They need to come here the legal way. But imagine being so desperate that you risk your life and your children's life. And seeing that image, it broke my heart. It broke my heart. And I knew I needed to memorialize that in some way to bring something good to that.
I wonder if you see an extension to what happened in Uvalde. I think there is, but I'd like you to talk about it if you can or you would.
Yeah, with the Uvalde shooter, he was a Chicano, a Mexican American, a Latino, a Hispanic, however you want to categorize him. And I think about the fact that we messed up. We're the ones that effed up. We should have a better understanding of our community. We should have a better understanding of the children, the youth that are growing up in our community, so that they don't get into that state of mind of despair, which I'm sure that person felt. I'm not trying to sympathize with them, but I'm sure that person was lonely and had trouble. And instead of us being a community, a strong Mexican community, a strong Chicano community, it's like everybody kind of pushed that person aside. They kind of forgot about the shooter. No one was looking out for him. They interviewed people. They said, yeah, we knew he did these horrible things. No one was looking out for him. And to me, that shows sort of like the Mexican community, the Chicano community, Latino community. If we can't go in this direction, we can't follow those same steps that they're expecting us to follow, or we don't understand who our neighbors are, or we don't break bread with the people in our community. Instead, we ignore them. We can't follow that because we're already under so much pressure and so much discrimination from the United States that we have to take care of ourselves and our community. And we let that one go because we weren't taking care of our community at that point. And the same with, what the poem is about. We live here on the border. Why the hell do we have border patrol and military and fencing? Here in El Paso, we have this big, beautiful river that cuts between El Paso and Juarez, and it's all caged up. It's wrapped in concrete. It has fences around it. Imagine how beautiful it is. You go to other cities, Austin, they have a big, beautiful river in the middle. Everybody gets to partake and enjoy that, and not us, And I think if we start to come together as a community, these kind of tragedies won't happen. It's almost like we have to build a version of the Underground Railroad, but for people crossing over,
And yet the United States has a tremendous draw, right? It's a magnet for people who are looking for that pozole that they can share, wherever. I've had pozole, vegetarian pozole, because I don't eat meat. I am a vegetarian, but
really good.
The radishes, I can taste the crisp radishes and so forth. And that's part of what I think El Paso is too. I think it's a transcultural community. Talk about that in terms of your writing in general. I'm going to shut up in a minute so that Scott and Jenny can have a chance. But can you talk about just the nature of El Paso and how that kind of undergirds your writing?
You know, it's very beautiful, right? Because El Paso and Juarez, we're looking at like 3.5, 4 million people kind of crammed up against each other in these two cities, right? Juarez being about 2 million, El Paso being close to 1 million people, right? So they're jammed up against each other. And, you know, as a kid, you cross back and forth, you go visit family back and forth. But it really wasn't until I left El Paso that I realized something's different, right? Because in El Paso, everybody's bilingual. You know, it doesn't matter. The soldiers from Fort Bliss, they're all bilingual. Everybody's bilingual here. Mostly everybody's brown, you know? So I grow up in this world where like, I don't realize that I'm Mexican or Chicano or Latino until I leave and someone points out to me, hey, you kind of have an accent or your skin's dark. And when I saw El Paso like that, I realized like, wow, it's kind of like it's almost like a reservation, you know, like you can't leave El Paso without being stopped by the police in any direction, right? Without being stopped by these authority figures. And it kind of changed my perspective on how special and amazing El Paso and Juarez are because of that, you know. You go other places and right away, you know, people start assigning stereotypes to you. People start making assumptions about who you are. You know, you go anywhere out of El Paso, especially at the height of the drug cartels, people were like, wow, you must live in a dangerous place. It must be scary for you. You live so close to the border. And I'm here explaining to people like El Paso is the safest city in the country. I don't know what you all are talking about, you know? But these assumptions are put on you and you don't realize that growing up here, you know, because everybody here is brown.
Yeah. Scott, Jenny, you have a question for Carlos?
Well, I got a question with, not to jump ahead of Jenny like this, but like far as it's about the border, I was going to mention like, so I mentioned I half grew up in San Diego, which is not as close to the border where I was as you are right now. But I've talked to other people in other countries and they don't believe about the militarization, I can't say the word, militarization of the border, or that like there's a border check like north of LA or within the country, and then how the border patrol says within 100 miles of the border, which is a like ungodly amount of territory, they could check you wherever, or how they hassle you, and it's all like they disbelieve you, you know, of course, like other like Anglos disbelieve you here about how they act. And I really like in your work that you're like, you know, you're showing how they are. You're denouncing them. You're saying how like people that are like have been here for like thousands of years can cross over. Like, why can't they cross over? And like how we've survived. I mean, this is adding into. I'm just adding into like this for me. This other kind of work, witnessing like what we go through and like what the border does to us, and like how it's like imposed and how like it's like a military force. You know.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to poke fun at that, you know, because there's like, you see a border patrol agent, you know, with a nopal on their forehead,
yeah.
you
They're
know,
the worst.
and then, but then you go to a family cookout and like the Theo's the border patrol agent there, you know what I mean? And I wanted to make fun of that. And, you know, the ideas of like a border patrol agent who dresses up like Spider-Man. Does he still wear his Spider-Man outfit under his uniform, you know, thinking he's protecting the border? Or, you know, I think I put, you know, my friend Javi's dad is built like a nopal, you know, because the dude, you know, he looks like a cactus, this big round guy, but he's a border patrol agent. So I kind of wanted to poke fun at that, you know, instead of trying to fight it or to be like militant against that, because we've tried that and really we don't have the firepower to do that, you know. But I think if we kind of see the border patrol as what I see them as, which is kind of like a joke, you know, maybe we can change our perspective on them and how they interact with our community, you know.
Maybe one other question I asked for Jenny jumped in here. Like, so this is a bit of a reader's response, but like I recently went through, you know, Aztlan all the way, you know, from California through Texas and Oklahoma, and I've passed through. So I grew up like in the high desert, and it's been a while since I've seen a desert, and I really love seeing how you portray the desert, because like a lot of times it's not the you you know, mystical, oh, I love the stars at night. It's like there's desiccation and death, but it's also something that forms people, and it's like you know, it's something survivable. There's beauty in it as well. But I really loved how, like, I mean, you often see these creatures that you portray that are like dried out and dying, and the desert's a hard place. Actually, I had a question there. I forget what the question was. I mean, let me see here. I think this kind of goes into like you celebrate like survival, right? A lot of Chicano culture and like the Tia that makes it across the desert, you know, like their stomping feet. I
Yeah.
mean, how does like this culture and survival all go in with the desert for you?
I mean, I think I was inspired by Ben Sines, who was the chair of the creative writing department when I was getting my MFA at UTEP, and so, you know, of course, I'm inspired by he had these series called the Meditations on the Desert, and I read those and I thought, wow, like, you know, like you said, the desert is often put into these like terms of mystical or not being like this real place, you know, it's all these beautiful, the stars, and I wanted to kind of show it how it is real. But I also have all of these other ideas coming in, like, for example, when Raymond Carver, he wanted to sober up, so he came to teach at the University of Texas at El Paso. And so one of the poems that I wrote about was, I think it's called Sobriety in the Desert, Finding Sobriety in the Desert, was kind of about that, like how, you know, the desert, it dries you out, it refines you. And of course, I'm a huge fan of the movie recently came out of Dune. You know, my dad used to read me Dune when I was a little kid, and I imagine those landscapes, you know, as a little kid, I imagined they were home, because you go outside of the neighborhood and it was just desert, like just dust and dirt. So I try to kind of incorporate all those ideas coming in and just kind of see how I can look at the desert without falling into the same tropes or cliches that you know, that have been built over the years.
Jenny, did you have anything you want to ask?
Well, one of the things I don't want to get away from the sort of like sci-fi overlap, because we end up talking with writers about that a lot, because we're sort of, some of us are fans of sci-fi. We end up talking with a lot of fans of sci-fi. But before I forget, I really liked what you said about trying to use a different strategy to approach criticizing the Border Patrol, and using humor and seeing how that plays out and how that works, and following that. Because one of the things that I kept seeing over and over in poems was, you know, you would make these references to pop culture, and they were really, the connections and stuff were unexpected. And I like the way that you brought readers into the associations that a person, like one single person, could have with maybe a really painful memory or experience, and a song like Jolene, or Anthony Bourdain talking about bone marrow stew, things like that. Or even like the idea of having guts or courage, and tribe, and connecting that with Border Patrol. It was just really, I thought, I'm not going to know how this, you know, kind of comes full circle, but I want to find out. And I really enjoyed finding out. And there's not really a question in there, but it's just sort of,
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I think that you know, as a fan of Chicano literature and someone who's read a lot, I really wanted to. So much of literature, and I know this is, you know, this is going to sound off, but maybe stay with me. I'll get to the point. But so much of Chicano literature is written to explain our culture to white people, to the popular culture, right? And so much of it is like you'll read a story and it'll say something like, this is a burrito. What a burrito is a tortilla made of, you know, flour, and it's trying to explain all of that, right? But like I said, I had this beautiful opportunity to have been born and grow up in El Paso, and I never kind of saw that world in this like brown versus white. And I just want to say, like, how could we tell our stories without them having to like be about explaining our culture to somebody, you know? Everybody here on the border knows who Spider-Man is, you know, and all that wonderful stuff. So I wanted to write it so that it doesn't have that sort of feel to it where I'm just trying to explain, oh, this is our culture, this is the border, this is how we feel about it. But to just kind of like yeah, have fun with it and just tell the story almost the way, like, I have a reader in my head, right? It's my buddy Alex Roca, and whenever I'm writing, I think to myself, because he's not into literature, he's not into he's not into academia, right? But he helped me start Barrio Panther, the literary magazine, and he loved it in that sense. So I always think about him, and I think about, like, what would make him laugh if we were there talking and we're having a beer and smoking a J and just listening to music and we're just talking about life. What would make him laugh? And that's kind of how I approach my writing, especially in this book. Like, I was hanging out with my friends and we're just hanging out. What'll make them laugh? And yeah, that's why I found those, those references come in to play, and it's not just about political issues on the border.
But I like that you made readers feel like it might be something that would seem innocuous to them because they don't happen to have that association with, like, a song or whatever it happens to be. But now they're sort of twisted up inside too, like whether with humor or with sadness. And they're like, oh, I could see how now forever this song is this, or now forever there are these, like, the ways that somebody could be sitting around and then something comes on the radio or something and it takes them back to this moment. It's like you really pull readers like that into that moment and show them, like, kind of how that association forms.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Thank you for that. Yeah, definitely. How, in our minds we move back and forth. We're fluid. We're thinking about the past and we're thinking about the future, and mostly not paying attention to the present. And kind of we're moving in between these spaces. And that's something that I really wanted to put into the book, is this sort of slippery. They're not all serious poems. They're not all poems about landscape. They're not all poems about politics, but that's all in there somewhere.
If I can jump in, maybe like one poem I really like, you're speaking about music and stuff like that. I really like Ricardo Valencia Plays the Blues. It's a really great ode to Richie Valens. I mean, he's a big figure for me, at least for me, for several reasons. Like that. Like that movie came out in the 80s. My grandmother took me to see it 3 times. Like everyone's talking about it. He's like his presence is like, still around. You still feel it. I mean, like there's a lot of celebrations for him. And in Pacoima, they just changed the name of the post office to his name. But that line, I mean, this isn't a question, but more appreciation. I'm sorry, but I did like it. This line, the last line of yours is really great. 500, like old Donna, 500 years of distortion fuzz through a broken speaker propped up on a chair. I really love that. That's it's the expression of culture of 500 years coming out through Richie Valens. And maybe you could talk about because you have some other, like you talk about I forget her name offhand, but the woman that did the who fought against the border agents that were putting pictures of like their naked bodies in bars and things like that. I mean, he has like several like odes or like retellings of like Chicano cultural heroes. Maybe you can talk about how they enter into your work and how important.
Can I jump in?
Oh, sure.
I was just going to ask Carlos if he would comment on that poem, Why El Paso No Longer Has Streetcars That Cross into Mexico. So you kind of took some of my steam out already, Scott.
I planned that.
Oh, you planned that. I might have known. Yeah, well, that's one of those poems that I think Jenny, you referred to it, where there is some humor that you use. And this poem, I wasn't sure, but did this really happen? It must have happened. It could have happened.
Yep.
Why not happen, Can you tell me what the truth is behind this poem?
Yeah, so now this is a crazy history about Paso and Juarez, right? So, and all of this comes from Dr. David Romo's book, Ringside Seat to a Revolution.
Mm-hmm.
And then, to kind of connect it to the music, Dr. Romo and I had a jazz band going for a while called Glossolalia. Yeah, and so and you can find it on Spotify and all that stuff. And I read my poem in one of the songs. But so what was going on is to cross from Juarez into El Paso in the 1920s, you had to strip down naked, and then they would hose you down with gasoline or kerosene, right? Obviously, they were doing this for the workers that were crossing to Juarez, so the wealthy people didn't have to go through this. But the workers who were coming into Juarez, they had to strip them down. They would get them naked. They would spray them with gasoline or kerosene or Zyklon B, and they started taking pictures of the women that they were stripping down, right? So these two scientists from Germany come into El Paso to study fumigation on a population. And then those scientists, those German scientists, go and use that to create the gas chambers in Nazi Germany, right? So the idea actually comes from El Paso and Juarez. Carmelita Torres started a riot because she didn't want to get naked. She had crossed back and forth many times and had to go through the process, and she didn't want to get naked. So she started a riot on the bridge. And so the riot lasted for a few days, and they had sent in all of the, the troops from Fort Bliss. They sent in the troops from Mexico to try to kind of calm this riot down. And really, like, the sad thing is that the history of her kind of disappears after that. We don't really know what happened to her after that. And so she's been called the Rosa Parks of the border. And I had never heard that. When I read this, back in 2000 out of this book, and I started looking up the history, I'm like, wow, there's so much history that the entire world hinges on that came here from El Paso and Juarez. And this person was never recognized. Carmelita Torres is never recognized as some civil rights leader or anything like that. And I thought, what a great way to memorialize her by putting her in a poem and imagining how angry she must have been, and the other women that were there with her, ready to get, to get stripped down naked and gassed, right? So then recently, like in probably 2010, El Paso brings back the streetcars because they hadn't been in service for a long time. So they do this whole streetcar theme. But, without surprise, those streetcars aren't going back and forth into Juarez. They're just circling around, the entertainment district, Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Ricardo Romo's book. It's a great read, and just as you say, provides some insights and insides of what happened in El Paso during the Mexican Revolution in 1910, I guess.
Yeah, it's like 1910 to like 1940, I think he goes.
Right. But it started right there in Juarez.
Yeah.
In the site of the El Paso hotels and so forth. People were buying tickets to view the fighting across the river.
Yeah. And Pancho Villa's houses are here, and
yeah.
And it's a beautiful history that's kind of squashed or had been squashed for a long time, and now it's resurfacing, which is really great.
It's a wonderful way to do it to poetry. This both has a humor to it and a certain, as I said, a kind of rawness just from knowing the truth.
Yeah, definitely.
It kind of, it also reminds me, like it kind of goes into, like I have like a little question here. It seems a lot of Chicano work has to do double duty in like providing our history and some culture that doesn't always get through the noise, and because we don't have as much like broadcasting or like education and whatnot. But you have a poem, 39 reasons why. Oh, wrong. What is it? 39 reasons why Chicanexes should go to college, and particularly I love the ending. It turns this cliche into a statement of Chicano empowerment because you're a poet and you didn't even know it. Right, it's you have potential in yourself, right? And so I think this is like a great statement on like Chicano education, the need for it, and like how we can empower by having our own cultural and history and stuff like this. Maybe what are your thoughts on providing this kind of education and history and empowerment?
Well, that line, you're a poet, you didn't even know it, is from my buddy Mouse, who's a musician and an artist here in El Paso, and I loved it so much. I'm like, hey, can I use this? He's like, yeah, go ahead, man. But yeah, there's in the 1970s, I think it was 1976, at the University of Texas at El Paso, they took over some of the buildings there, the one that I believe it was the building that had the financial aid, because they weren't giving financial aid to students who had Spanish last names, right? Spanish surnames. So they took over the building and they had announced the protests and everything. So they had brought in the National Guard to make sure that it didn't get violent. And to me, that kind of like, that's kind of our history. I think it's ironic that now that, you know, we see record number of Chicanos or Latinas or Latinos or Latinxes going into the universities. Now they're starting to say, well, your degree isn't worth as much as they're not worth as much as they used to be. And I'm like, well, wait a minute, look at the demographic of the people who are coming here now. Now you're trying to claim that the degrees aren't worth as much. But I think they're important. That's where we find out about our history. That's where we find out about the possibilities of what we can do. And that's where we start to connect, I think, on a bigger level than just our neighborhoods and our barrios, right? Now we have connecting on all these levels and introducing that into academia. You know, UTEP has a great creative writing program. It's the only bilingual creative writing program in the country. And, you know, I think it's not necessarily like educating ourselves, but it's in this weird way, you know, as I've been a teacher for 10 years and I used to teach GED and ESL classes, and I would take my GED students and get them registered at community college or at UTEP. And a lot of that, I mean, the fear, and I felt this going into college, the fear that I had of academia, of going to these, you know, colleges and you see all these buildings and you don't even know where the hell you're going to get to and where's my class. That's the biggest thing that holds us back, you know, and that's the biggest, it's that fear. It's not that we can't accomplish or that we're not great students or you know, that we're not dedicated to it, but it's that fear so many of us have, right? And also this sort of, you know, guilt that we feel. I can't be going to college. I got to be working, you know, that kind of guilt and those types of things. If we can kind of erase those and show people that you know, it's not that big of a deal. You just have to find out, you have to find the map to it. But the map isn't hard to find, you know, we can give it to you. And I think that's, if we can start teaching that to students and future students, that's important. And that's why, because once you get over that fear, I teach writing and everybody tells me, I'm scared of what you're going to put on my, you know, on my paper when you give it back, mister. I'm scared to write a sentence. And I tell them, like, don't worry about it, just relax. And once they can get over that, then they can accomplish more things, you know, more without having that fear, or even if they have that fear, overcoming it because they know they can.
Well, one comment I can make about that is that as an editor, and we've all had to face this, you know, getting a manuscript from someone who has been writing for a while hasn't dared to have other people look at it. And I've found very often, and we've published many new writers, people who have never published before, and we're always looking for that type of individual. But it does take some, you know, bit of courage to show something that you've written to somebody else. And I can imagine that you'd be kind of tough on a student, which is good. But I think, I wonder if you've, this is part of it, that a writer has to have encouragement from someplace. There's something that has to happen for them to take that step, you know, to show it, because you know, it's showing a vulnerability. Obviously, if somebody doesn't like it or they laugh at it or whatever, it can hurt. But I just want to kind of put a plug that we are looking for young people or old people. It doesn't, age is not a factor really, who you know, have this desire to express themselves, and it can be poetry or fiction and nonfiction. But one has to be, and I'm talking about myself, one has to be open to new material and to new ways of saying things. And I think that's one of the you know, really fine things about your poetry, that it does, I think, open yourself up, you yourself, to questions about, well, did he really say that, or did he really do that, or why am I reading this stuff? It's disturbing. Or, but I'm sure at some point you decided that you wanted to express yourself. Can you talk about that? Like when you really began to put words on the paper and what that kind of process was?
There's a saying, I'm not sure who to credit it to, because I've heard a lot of writers say it. It could have been Hemingway or Raymond Carver or maybe Charles Bukowski, but it was, you sit there and bleed. And a lot of those poems, especially the ones that, involve family dynamics,
Mhm.
that's what I was doing. I was sitting there and trying to put as much pain as I could into those poems, and as much hurt, not to disturb the reader, and not to be sort of, I think a lot of poets, when they write their poetry, they kind of use it as a tool to face trauma. But for me, I wanted to bring the readers into this world, but the world it's a world of a lot of suffering, right? And I think after I bring them into, that's how I kind of digest or interpret fear and anger, is that I go straight to humor, and that's why, like, for example, I wrote, I laughed when I saw my stepmom get popped in the eye with the pit of an aguacate, right? Because that's how I would interpret that trauma, through humor, right? And I'm not trying to get it out. It hurts. Like when I was reading that first poem at the beginning of the interview, I couldn't get through it. My voice is cracking up, and I don't want to start crying on video, right? But I sit here and I think about, how am I going to bleed on this keyboard, right? How am I going to bleed on this blank page? Or I like to handwrite my stuff. I usually handwrite a big chunk of it before I put it onto the computer. So how am I going to bleed on this paper? And that's my approach to writing. I have luckily I have this, not luckily, with hard work, I have this novel that's coming out with Flower Song Press in the winter, that has a lot of that also in it. That has a lot of this sort of, how to deal with pain and how it gets internalized.
Mhm. Well, would you mind reading another poem and talking about it? I think it blends into this discussion we were having just a moment ago. It's on page, I think 34. It's called Leather Mat. I'm very curious about where this comes from, what you were thinking, what you wanted to express in it. It's called Leather Mat.
Okay. Leather Mat.
Would you mind reading that?
Sure. Yeah, I have it right here. Yeah. Sorry, I clicked the video off. There we go. Leather Mat. Slam that body against me, bleed on me, sweat on me, spit on me. I want to feel opposing muscles and joints digging in. I want to grasp victory, to pin another human down. I want a referee to lift my hand to the sky. I want to touch the gods. I'm not fast enough to get in on a leg, or strong enough to lift that boy, or smart enough to anticipate a duck under. All those years of rolling on mats, ankles snapping, collarbones splitting. It was me, mijo, waiting for you to lose. I want you to fail, always, cry on me, pound your fist into me, curse me. Okay, so Leather Mat, when I was in high school, I used to wrestle. And we had this wrestling coach who came in. He wasn't an official coach. He just kind of started hanging out with us. And our wrestling coach allowed him to come in, and the school district, kind of recognized him as a coach. And it turns out that he was a scam artist, and he had been arrested for sexual assault. A lot of it with, people who had been on wrestling teams that he had coached. He got arrested also for credit card fraud. And we found out all of this stuff. I had found out all this stuff, I think the year after I graduated from high school. So, and thinking about the act of wrestling, it's this people smashing bodies against each other, trying to hold each other down and pin each other down. And I think that was kind of my way of interpreting that time in my life. And this idea of what it would take to wrestle another human being down, to hold another human being down in hopes that you're victorious over them, in hopes that, like it says, that a referee will pick up your hand and you can touch the gods, And so that's where that inspiration comes from.
Well, what I wanted to we'll get into was at the end it says, "It was me, mijo, waiting for you to lose. I want you to fail always. Cry on me, pound your fist into me, curse me." Who is saying that?
It would be that coach. His name was AJ Guerrero, but I think that was his.
Yeah, we don't need to.
Yeah, I don't think that was his real name. That was his, how he used to sneak in. But it was that coach, because on this one hand, he was this father figure to us, and he taught us to be mean, and he taught us to be good wrestlers, and he taught us this idea of standing up for yourself and how to be tough. And on the other hand, on the backside, he was doing all of these horrific things to people on the wrestling team, right? So it's him, like he's the father figure there, and he's waiting for us to lose so that when we lose, he can be the one that comes and comforts us. And because he was a wrestling coach, he would wrestle with us also, So he'd be there like, yeah, try to beat me up. And he was this big guy, and so that's who's waiting there at the end. That's who's there watching us as sort of this, second father figure, that comes into life with coaches or with mentors.
I see.
That's a creepy story, of course, and horrible, but I mean, but it also reminds me a bit, there's a famous Joyce Carol Oates story, which I can't remember, but it's one of the stories that she's been studied for a lot. It's about an actual figure in the 1950s in Arizona, I believe, where it was the same kind of guy. He was like 30, 35. He would dye his hair. He would hang out, wrestle with the kids, and he would kidnap them and murder them, and it was a strange, he was a scam artist. Same thing. He was a scam artist. He was pretending to be younger. He's pretending to be a teenager when he's in his 30s. I don't know what wrestling has to do with, but yeah, it seems like a similar thing where it's a strange figure that gets drawn to, to do these crazy things via wrestling.
Yeah, and I think it's especially when you're coming from communities sometimes where there's broken homes and things like that. It's easy for a person to come in and creep like that on people who don't have that, And I remember one time he was going to take 4 of us to go watch the World Cup of Wrestling in Oklahoma, and none of the parents wanted to go. So it was just going to be the 4 of us and him, and who the hell knows what would happen to us, right? But the day before we leave, my dad's like, "I'm going to go with you guys." And I'd like to think, I'm not sure, I can't speculate too far, but I'd like to think that saved us, because if it would have just been him with 4 boys in the car, who knows where we would have ended up, And so I'm always thinking about that. I'm always grateful to that. To that, my dad, that he had the insight to be like, "No, I'm going to follow you guys. I'm going to go with you guys."
Yeah, it's what you wonder, huh?
Yeah, definitely.
Jenny?
Oh, I was just going to say that's a really good example of how much I admired how much you were willing to, like you said, bleed on the page and find words, which is so hard to describe or call forth some of these experiences that I wish were less widespread. But it's I think reading that book, it made me think, oh, I want to be able to put words to things. It might not be the same things, but it's some of these kinds of things, whether it's family dynamics or something like you just described. And or even being in the room with somebody when they pass away, or coming into a room after someone that you care about has passed away. All of these all of these different things where I think it speaks a little bit to what you were saying earlier about like being able to provide space, like both being able to have models like your book that students can actually read and think like have something to aspire to in terms of opening up and being more vulnerable, and talking about some of these things that are taboo, but also I think in terms of like just mental health stuff that people deal with, which you were bringing up earlier, and you and Armando were talking about a little bit, like giving space for people to actually hash out some of the stuff and not just cover it up and not just kind of water it down or anything like that, really bleed on the page.
Yeah, I think that's, I mean, we're all divided up by, cultures and black and white and brown. And we have all these labels that divide us up. But in literature, we all connect to it through sympathy and empathy. And when you can read somebody's experiences, even if they're not from the same areas you're from, or from the same religious backgrounds you're from, or from the same, whatever the belief is, we can all feel when someone's hurt on the page, and we can all learn to empathize and sympathize with each other. And that's sort of like, when I sit down and write, I'm not thinking about that when I'm writing it, but that's sort of like a beautiful byproduct that happens from it, is that people can sympathize and empathize with the work, and people can see themselves in the speakers in these poems. And that's the way I feel when I read somebody's work, when I read, whatever writer I have in front of me, when I can latch onto those characters and sympathize and empathize with them, that's when I know that it's something that's good. That's good literature.
Something you just said reminded me of one of the poems in here that's about your grandfather. I assume it's your grandfather, and it's here it is, page 39.
The mortician spatchcocks my
Yeah.
grandfather.
Yeah, that was very descriptive, and again, hard to I'll say hard to stomach. I mean, it was like so many times one has, all of us have seen someone who's been prepared for the funeral, and it's not easy to swallow. But as Jenny suggests, this is kind of like laying yourself out there, and so to speak, and saying some pretty I think incisive and disturbing comments about this person you see lying there, who's being made up, or being cleaned up by the mortician, and it's and the whole thing where she dresses him in his favorite gray suit and slides a wedding band up past his middle knuckle. Well, yeah, this must have been a personal experience again, trying to deal with it.
Yeah, I mean, one of the ways that I looked at this, and I'm not sure if you all have experience with this or not, but when somebody passes away and you go and then they show you the caskets that they can be buried in, and they start upselling you all of these little trinkets and all of these little products, and really something that's very personal. And you have your family that are grieving, and then here are the people who own the funeral parlors, and here they are trying to sell you a mahogany casket that's $2,000, and they're trying to, you can put satin in the interior so your loved one can rest for it. They don't even know the name. It's so impersonal. And I thought about what it must be like to be a mortician, working on people's grandfathers, children, siblings, people that were loved, and sort of how did you disconnect knowing that? Yeah. And I thought about, in this case, maybe the mortician sees themselves in every person that they're working on, right? And that's why towards the end of the poem, the mortician, she goes back to her place, and she imagines herself as these dead people and how a mortician would work on them. So really that's what drove that, the idea of how impersonal funerals are. Even though we're family and we're all grieving together and it's very personal for us, it's a business for other people.
Mhm.
And that's what the inspiration came. And also my grandfather, when my grandfather passed away, about 2 months later, the Minutemen were coming down from California and Arizona to host a meeting in El Paso. And I remember seeing that on the news, and I was like, oh, hell no. And I got my friends and we jumped in my car and we drove down there to confront the Minutemen. And to my surprise, there was hundreds of people out there also there to confront the Minutemen. And that's really when I kind of began my connection to, Chicano community and community building. And that idea was through that experience. I mean, I was so angry, I was livid, and they wouldn't even let me into the meeting room because I was like, let me talk to these guys. And they're, no, this is a recruitment only. But the fact that there were hundreds of us standing outside protesting them, that really got me connected, So I have to write about my grandfather for obviously coming to the States and going through what he went through, but also for, in this weird way, connecting me to the Chicano community, which in his own heart, he despised. In his own heart, he looked down upon, and ended up connecting his grandson to it.
Mhm. I know another generation or earlier generations just did not like the use of the word Chicano.
Yep.
And I think it's because it did bring back memories of discrimination, and they considered Chicano as a put down of ourselves, because it was a word that really evolved out of our own experience. But era una palabra que solo los pachucos usaban,
Yep.
So there was that reaction. It has a lot of story in it, in this particular poem. Scott, Jenny? We're getting close to the hour.
Yeah,
so-
we're getting close. Maybe quickly, only thing I left wondering is you have a lot of perhaps it goes into the desert and the formation of people, but you have a lot of this like before you're saying putting blood on the page, like personal trauma, like divorce, like death and stuff like this. And it seems like it's tied in with the desert and it's tied in with this Chicano experience and your own personal experience. I mean, maybe you can talk about this, I think trauma comes up a lot in our Chicano, our people's poetry, right? And how do we deal with it? How do we get by? Is this a vehicle? I know you talked earlier about using people use poetry for healing if you wanted something more. Maybe we can talk about how does trauma affect as far as poetry, and how do we, is this a way for us to deal with our own cultural trauma and personal trauma by seeing yours? Or
like I said, I always interpret it in terms of humor. And so as an editor of Barrio Panther, I get a lot of poetry, and a lot of it just deals with the trauma, but in a sense of I was traumatized when I was young because I was abused in this way. But I had this professor, Lex Williford, and I'll never forget this. He told us, you all are losers. And I thought that was what the hell is this dude telling me? I'm a loser. What's wrong with you, And he's like, no, if you look at literature is about loss, good literature, short stories, right? The way he put it was, history is told by the winners, and literature is sort of the corrective for that. And it's told about loss. So that's really what motivated me more than the trauma that comes out in here, right? Is the loss. What gets lost in all of this? What gets lost in abuse, what gets lost in, in these sort of like little events that happen in our lives. What do we lose there? And so when I'm working on this book, I'm thinking of it that way. And this is something that I suggest to a lot of people who are getting into writing is like, if you're going to write stuff that hurts and it's going to be personal stuff, don't think that you're going to get over it after you're done writing it. It's going to be worse. It's like every time I sit down and I have to read something in here that did happen. Now, a lot of this is, made up. I pulled from my life, but a lot of it is also, stuff that I imagined, right? And it's funny because my sister's always like, every time I meet somebody who reads your book, they're always like, did that really happen to you guys? So I pull in a lot of personal stuff, obviously, but also I try to, make it a story or make it a poem that has a narrative, right? So if you're going to write about something that's traumatic, don't expect it to go away afterward. It's not a therapy session. This is a work of art, and think of it as something that's going to hang up, that you're going to hang up on the wall forever, and people are going to look at it forever. And if you're okay with that, then okay, include whatever trauma you want. But if you're not okay with being that vulnerable and having to see that image up every day, having to see that painting of yourself naked or whatever it is, in this case, a poem, right? Then don't do that. Focus on creating the narrative first, and then understand. Once you understand narrative, then understand how you can incorporate your experiences to connect with readers.
And that's what makes writing so interesting and so challenging, right?
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, but I'm glad you guys are out there, and I'm glad you all are putting out good writing and good stuff. And that's great. That's great to see the community building like this. And
absolutely.
This counterbalance.
Right.
Yeah.
Carlos, thank you very much for joining us. We look forward to seeing your new work and your book. Thank you for sharing your thoughts about this collection of poetry, and we wish you well. We hope to, we'll be featuring your work in our magazine, and look forward to continued collaboration with you in whatever form that might take. Thank you very much, and thank you, Scott and Jenny. We'll be seeing you again at our next discussion on Zoom.
All right, great. If there's a couple of things that can I plug really quick?
Sure.
Barrio Panther Volume 4 is coming out in July, and I have some great artists and great writers in it. So keep an eye out for that. And then, my book Smothered is going to come out in the winter of this year with Flower Song Press, and which I'm totally excited to be working with them. And also you can check out my music at Glossolalia and the Midnight Saints on all major streaming platforms.
Oh yeah, well, what do you play?
I play guitar and bass and drums and keyboard and anything I can get my hands on, really.
You're a one-man band.
Yeah, as much as I can. But on that band, I played percussions and bass.
What's the name of the band again?
Glossolalia.
Okay,
and the Midnight Saints.
Okay, cool. We'll be seeing you again and hearing you.
All right. Thank you all very much. I appreciate it. I enjoyed talking to you all.
We enjoyed it too, Carlos. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.